G'day and welcome to Aussie Vision. I'm Dale and I'm joined by the lovely Liv, Sam and Craig from the Aussie Vision team because it is a massive day for us here in Australia. We have our Eurovision 2024 entrant finally, Electric Fields with one Milkily, which is one blood in brackets. A fantastic entry in my opinion, but I'm very keen to hear from the rest of the Aussie Vision team what their thoughts are on the song. So, Liv, I'm going to start with you. Give us your initial reaction and thoughts on the song.
I get this. I think a little bit worried at first, maybe, because 2000 and whatever is a hard act to follow. But for me, the thing that sticks the most with this entry is that there are a lot of songs that talk about, under our skin, we all are the same, unity, love, all that kind of thing. But for me, this is a very warm and inviting way to talk about that message. It feels like it sort of invites the listener to really open up emotion and be vulnerable, and in a really warm and exciting kind of way. There are other entries at Eurovision that have sort of explored these topics in the past, but they're either a little bit generic and naff, or they can sometimes hit you over the head with the emotion and you come out bruised at the other side. Whereas with this, it's actually a really soft way of kind of presenting it. And then it's also really colorful and bright. And for me, that's what it really stuck with me the most, especially with a lot of things that are going on in the world at the moment. Emotionally, it had a lot of impact for me.
Yeah, very, very well said. I think it is like a warm hug, really, with everything going on. Sweet spot of that emotion. Now, Sam, I know you're a fan of Electric Fields and you're a fan of 2000 or whatever. What did you think of this entry?
Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. I'm a very big fan of Electric Fields, and I really was hoping they'd represent Australia with the right song. And I think it's 5 years too late. They really should have won in 2019, in my opinion. But unfortunately, I have to say, I'm one of those people that doesn't get the song and feeling a little bit disappointed and concerned as an Australian. I think on paper it sounds great. It features a lot of, the Indigenous language and instruments. There's a sophisticated fusion of different musical genres, and there's great Indigenous and queer representation, especially coming the week after Mardi Gras. But for me personally, this does absolutely nothing for me, sadly. I just feel like it doesn't quite go anywhere. I think the great thing about 2000 and whatever is it grabbed your attention from the get-go. This one doesn't quite do that for me. And I feel like it doesn't quite build anywhere. It sort of stays on the same level for me. So whilst it's certainly very radio friendly and anthemic, as Liv pointed out, I'm not sure of necessarily the type of song that does well at Eurovision. I feel like it's unique, as you said, Dale, in your sort of solo video early in the day. But I feel like it's just not quite attention grabbing enough for me and for Eurovision. Yes, but let's wait and see. And I'm sure maybe I'm in the minority, but that's why we're having this discussion today. Yes.
Exactly. And I think the thing is, like, I think it is going to be a song that's going to divide people. I don't think this is going to be for everybody. And if it doesn't hit your sweet spot, then, it's totally understandable. But hopefully it hits enough people in Europe, but we'll get to that later. Craig, what are your thoughts?
There's like such an intimacy to this that I just like the first time you hear it, it just sort of grabs me in that sense. I can already imagine on that, we've got the big plus sign stage this year, and you can almost imagine them standing in the middle, like staring at each other, standing, singing this to each other almost as like the camera goes round and round and round, like they're in space, and like it would just be such a moment. And that's the emotion that I was served from the first listen. I think it's really consistent with what the sort of music that Electric Fields makes on like a day-to-day basis. Like, they're jobbing artists. 2000 and whatever was, I think, it's a great song. I love it. But it's when you go to an Electric Fields concert, they do a 2000 and whatever, and then they kind of do an hour of stuff that sounds like this. And I feel like this is really quite representative of what they are like as artists. I feel like the thing that really stands out to me in a positive way from 2019, though, is that production-wise, this is so much an improvement over where they were 5 years ago. If you listen back, like everyone like has a bit of rose-tinted goggles for 2000 whatever, I think it's great. But when you go back and listen to it, the production there is quite bare. There's sort of like this bare dance beat, a couple of other effects, and then not much else going on. Whereas this has so much density and so much richness to it that I think it's just a much fuller production and a much fuller piece of art which sells, again, that intimacy to me, which is what I'm really sold on by this act.
Yeah, I mean, I won't add too much more. I've done a separate video on that one as well. But like, look, I'm a big fan of it. I love 2000 whatever, and that was a slap in your face, and in a good way. And I think this is a different type of stickability, and one that kind of stays with you for a lot of people for the first time. I like this on first listen more than I liked Promise last year. Not that I didn't like Promise, but I was a bit overwhelmed. While this one was like immediately, I turned to Mike from Vision Team 1 minute in and went, this is good. I like it. All right, though, just like there's been mixed opinions in here, you probably have more friends outside of this room, Samuel, because there's been quite a bit of a mixed reaction online, actually, from Europe, and maybe it's not as much of Australia. What have you noticed from what you've seen, Sam? Are people kind of with you a little bit on maybe not feeling it?
I think, to be honest, I'll leave the social media analysis to Craig. I know he has a lot to talk about there, but I want to talk a little bit about maybe my Eurovision scoreboard and the bookies, if that's all right with you.
Of course, please.
And talk about some of those facts there. So I think on my Eurovision scoreboard, which is basically an app where thousands of Eurovision fans can give points to their favorite songs in the Eurovision season, it's currently languishing a bit at 24th out of 30. So maybe not the best sort of score-wise. Obviously, people will send their scores in throughout the day and throughout the coming days, but I think that's a bit of an indicator that it's not quite up there in people's top sort of songs. With the bookies, it's sort of drifting out a bit to 20th. We were sort of mid-teens in the betting a few days ago. So again, not the best sign. In terms of what I've seen on social media, I'm not a big social media buff, but I think on Facebook, the reaction, as you said, has been quite mixed. No one's gone out there and said, I absolutely despise this song, I hate this song, which is good. But some people are like me, they're like, it doesn't do too much to me. Some people really do like it, like a lot of people in this room. So I think actually it's not that people just dislike the song. I just think maybe it's not as eye-catching as some of the other entries so far. So that's what I would have to say about that.
No, fair enough. No, good, interesting analysis there, particularly on the betting and the scoreboard. Craig, you've been sussing out social media, you poor thing.
I've been suffering on social media.
What's the reaction been like?
Oh, I think I sort of divided it up into like Facebook good, Twitter, Zither, whatever I call it, bad, Reddit, kind of somewhere in the middle, which is generally like, that is the way of the world on social media, I feel. But I think for me, what's left out is I go through my daily life, and there are people in my daily life who interact with Eurovision casually, and the reaction from them has been great. So like my mate Tanya, hey Tanya, I'm sure you're watching. She's initially wasn't sure on it. Over the course of the day, she's been messaging me, being like, it's clicking, it's getting there. And my boss came in this morning and was like, great song, I love it. I hope it lifts live. And I guess the sort of midpoint position which I'm seeing emerge on this is like, it's not a bad song, as Sam says, perhaps not a moment in it which screams vote for me, and people are concerned about competitiveness in that sense. But I think there's also a recognition that there's scope for this to lift live. There's recognition that Zachariah's vocals incredible. There's recognition that Australia does do pretty good staging, and that this isn't dead in the water, I don't think, other than a few particularly negative voices on a certain social media site run by Elon Musk. But yeah, I guess the other thing I wanted to say, though, just domestically and talking to other Australians, is it's been like the worst year I've ever seen in terms of like the political discourse and discussions around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. I recognise that we're in a room here where there are no Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here, so not meaning to speak over other voices, but like it's been like back in the 90s when I was a kid. It's been horrendous since the referendum last year, and I'm just so proud. And so I think a lot of the people I've spoken to are really glad to see SBS go this way and say, there's still a commitment to diversity. There's still a commitment to continuing that conversation with, the other nations that exist on the Australian continent. So good on you, SBS. You done good.
Nice to say. Liv, what's your take been?
Well, I mean, every Eurofan will tell you, oh, no, I always love Voyager. No, I always love Kate Miller-Heidke. But you're liars. I have no You're all liars. I remember when you guys had her in the 30s and when you had Voyager at your 40th. And I'm just like, nah, excuse excuse me, you're all joking. So once Aussie artists hit the pre-parties, once the staging comes through or whatever, that's when the momentum starts to come. And this happens to us every year. I honestly, even the year Dami competed, there was still a little bit of polarizing around, was it good or was it boring, honestly. So every year there is always this kind of discussion with our entries where it's like, oh, I'm a bit underwhelmed. And then it sort of gets momentum and off we go. And oh no, I love you guys. See you next year. Like, whatever.
No, you're spot on. And I think, what's really interesting, and I think it comes into everything everyone said here, is that there's been separation and different pockets. I've really noticed the Australians and Facebook, and maybe because there's a lot of Australians that are in my sort of Facebook feed and Aussie Vision, that everyone's very proud, and everyone, most people really like it. And I think, there's one point is like, oh, is this very domestic for us? Because we're Eurovision fans are generally a bit more progressive. Are we feeling our oats about the domestic nature and it won't translate? So there's that question mark. But also, I think we get it. We see beyond the music video. We see the potential with it. And we've been here before. We're all used to Europe hating it at this point. And we're like, well, whatever. Even casual fans are like, oh, they always think this. Even some comments on our thing where I feel like sometimes we need to explain this to people. This year, they're like, nah, we get it. We know that people don't like us, and we'll just see what happens in May. And I'm like, I love that we've caught up with what's going on with it. I think the music video really impacted it. The music video is going to divide people, and I think it distracts people. And some European fans, I think of like Corey from the Netherlands, he's a fan press person, was like, I was so distracted, I didn't even know what to think. And then I listened to it and I loved it. And I think that video was a choice. But in one way, this is very Australia. We like to surprise at the end. We don't want people talking about us. Maybe a little bit of momentum at the end. And they've been hinting, Blink TV and SBS, of some really magical staging. So I'm like, hey, don't talk about us. Let's be low on the odds. Let's be low on the Eurovision scoreboard and surprise them all. Anyway, so that kind of goes into how it can go at Eurovision. Is it going to turn around from 24th out of 30 and 20th in the betting to somewhere that could end up being a better, like Voyager have done and others in the past? Liv, what's your take on how this could go at Eurovision?
Well, I think we do have a really unique song here. It's something that does have televote and jury appeal. There are a lot of really flashy televote songs this year, but also, Voyager going into last year, everyone was like, oh, I don't know. And then they won their semi. So, there is an Aussie love out there if we get things right. And I think, if we do get into that final, how many jury friendly songs are there? Honestly, this is something that could really soak up quite a lot of points. It's all going to all come down to the staging for me. And if they can get that emotion, that connection, I saw them in Richmond a couple of years ago and I was absolutely losing my mind. They have that special X factor. I love watching them perform. So if they could translate that down the telly, then I think this could do incredibly well left-hand side of the scoreboard in the final.
Nice. Craig, your thoughts?
So I agree. I want to start with the video because I think that is coloring people's perceptions a bit right now. It's a little bit like having a nightmare about your parents standing naked, staring at you like deep into your eyes for 3 minutes. And I just find it a bit much. I'm sorry, Zachariah. I'm sorry, Michael. I love you. But yeah, I think that might not have been the best visual to lead people's impressions with this. They may have even been better off going with like just a straight lyric video with nothing else on the screen. But once that shifts and once we sort of hopefully move to a really well executed live performance, I think there is scope for this to get through. I am trying to be realistic, and I think whereas Voyager, I wasn't worried about us getting out of the semi-final last year, but I was worried about how we'd go when we got there. This year, I feel like I have serious concerns about whether we will make it out of a televote only semi-final. But if we make it, I'm not actually that worried about what happens on Saturday. So I think it's very much about how is this going to go on, the first night. People are talking about semi-final one as the semi-final of death. I'm not really seeing it, to be honest. I think we are in a handful of songs there which have a shot of going through. It's not certain, but hopefully we can consolidate that with a stage performance that matches up to the emotions that, Dale and Liv and I are clearly feeling about this.
Sam, your thoughts? Obviously not a massive fan of the song, but how do you think it can go at Eurovision? Do you think it could turn it around for you even?
Well, I think I sort of agree and disagree with some things that Craig says. I think I agree with him that the issue is getting out of the semi, and then once we get to the final, I think it is a very jury-friendly song. It is a very radio-friendly sort of song that the jury seem to be liking in recent years. I have to disagree on the fact I think semi-final one is the more competitive semi. You have the two bookies' favorites, Croatia and Ukraine. You've got that Balkan trio, Croatian, Serbian, Slovenian, which will always vote for each other, and Poland and Lithuania, which have a strong diaspora vote that they can rely on. And even Luxembourg returning, they might get a very strong sympathy vote there. I will say on the flip side, though, we have the UK, Ireland, and Sweden voting for us, and those are generally quite favourable countries. And we are in the second half of the semi-final, which is actually the better running order. So we do have that going in our favour. But I am a little bit concerned about whether it can qualify in the televote, as I said, because I feel like it's a bit sort of middle of the road, doesn't not outstanding enough. But like Craig said, once it gets to the final, I think the jury will really get behind it. As Liv says, I really think the key now is staging, you know. I think they really need to hone in on some of the indigenous elements of the song in particular, because that's what televoters love. You know, you think of Kano in 2019 with those Sami influences, and they topped the televote in the grand final. If they can really pull together a good staging, and I think Australia, we credit where credit's due, we do staging really well. I mean, you know, think of Kate Miller-Heidke. I didn't like her song in the national final. I thought Electric Fields should have won, ironically. But then when it came to the staging at Eurovision, I was blown away, and it was my favorite. You know, I thought it was a brilliant staging. So I really hope that maybe SBS watches this video and really puts in a lot of effort into staging, which I know they will. And, you know, hopefully they'll turn around lots of people like me, and I'll be one of those losers that Liv was talking about before and love the song. So, yeah, but anyway, I'm still hopeful, and I'm really proud to be an Australian, and I think we'll deliver well on staging, hopefully. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's all to me, it's a little bit, without going too much, because I've heard in the video this morning, from us last year, heard it like that's been written for Eurovision, that's been written for the stage. This, I think, again, with Electric Fields, it's been written for them to do at Eurovision. I think there'll be much more flourishes. I think there will be moments that are not sitting in the obvious studio now. That end and that build up and the repetition of the title track. And there's also like a chorus or like a choir or something. We never do that. Australia never does that, right? So they do want to make a moment at the end of it. And I think there'll be a big moment to say, it might lose its way in the middle, but I think it'll come home strong. And look, even with the televote, semi-finals are much nicer to us than grand finals. You lose a neighbouring thing. You've got a more, I don't want to say smarter audience, but a more Australian-friendly audience. And we've only missed Ignore Montaigne because she was competing from Australia. You can't compare. Isaiah is the only one who's ever missed a top 10 for Australia. And that's because he hit the worst note that's ever been heard, right? That one thing.
Didn't he come ninth?
He came 14th in the televote. He missed the televote.
Oh, I hear you.
Yeah, but he qualified. So if in televote, he's the only one that's ever missed out performing live. So they're much more friendly to us. And we've only got to be about, I think it's 5 songs we've got to beat. And there's some dirge in there. Thank God we got second half of the running order. First half, I'd be a bit more worried. But I think this quality rises. And I think the quality's there. I don't know, I think it'll rise up. And I'm bizarrely not even worried at this point. Ask me in a month. But at this point, I can get through. And I do think it'll be tight, but we could have an Alika moment from last year. Alika was 10th, I think, in the semi-final and came, 8th overall. Like, that could happen for us. Like, it genuinely could. So we'll just have to wait and see. All right. Well, any last words from anyone that we haven't covered off, or anything, any biting last comments you want to make to each other?
I think people need to let go of 2019 and appreciate this for what it is. I think it's easy because people have been, you know, every time we do a poll, it's like, who do you want to represent Australia at Eurovision? It's always Electric Fields. And so there's, even though they only got announced out of the blue today, there's almost been this build up and expectation for like years. But like, let it go, guys. Appreciate this for what it is. And I think you will find that there is something to work with here and something to love, even if you just take this on its own merits.
You can put your bullying complaint into me afterwards, Sam. No, but I think
I'm getting a lot of hate mail after this video, but that's okay. I'm proud to be an Australian.
So one last thing as well is we're all too close, because we're going to have that comparison to 2000 whatever. it'd be amazing to get that understanding from someone who's never heard Electric Fields, never heard 2000 Water, have nothing else, and just have that fresh view on it. And I think without that, we're trying to guess what that's going to be, and it makes it tricky because we all know Electric Fields so well, so it makes it hard. All right. Well, look, thanks everyone for your insights. I love different discourse on the whole thing. It's good. It makes it fresh. It's good. So we'll catch you next time, and I'm sure we'll be talking about Australia more throughout the season before we get to Sweden. All right. Thanks very much. Bye.
Yeah.